Hello, this is Greg Rostami from Topaz Labs, and welcome to a tutorial on Topaz ReMask 3. Now we're going to get started by opening up an image that we want to mask away from its background. So we really like the dog, but we don't like the background, so we want to be able to cut the dog out of the background using Topaz ReMask 3. Now, by the way, there are two different layers here in Photoshop. I have a layer with the dog, and I have another layer here with some flowers that we would like to place the dog on top of. So here's how it works. Select your foreground layer. Under Filter, you're going to pull down to Topaz Labs, Topaz ReMask 3. Now, by default, Topaz ReMask 3 has now been set up in such a way so that if you look under the preferences, you will notice that there's going to be an auto layer created. This is a new feature in Topaz ReMask 3, so you don't have to worry about ever losing the original image that you started out with. Along the left-hand side, you're going to notice all of the tools that are going to allow you to cut the dog out of its background or mask the dog out of its background. Along the top, we have our different viewing modes, and we'll discuss that a little later. And then finally, we have in the upper right-hand corner ways of either viewing one image or a split view or even a quad view, and we'll see that in a little while as well. So let's get started with the most basic cutout that we can do. You'll notice that by default, Topaz uses a blue brush. The blue brush is equivalent to what's called a computation brush, meaning that whatever we go over here along the edges, which is obviously the hardest part of a composite or a mask, that's what we want the computer to actually compute. So we do the outline. Now you notice that by default the screen is green. Green tells ReMask what it should keep. Finally, we use the red bucket fill to fill around the perimeter. So now the red tells ReMask 3 what we completely don't want. Blue tells it what we want it to compute, which is the transfer areas, the most difficult part of masking. And then finally the green, we know that the green parts are completely solid on the dog. Once we have outlined these areas, you're going to click on the compute button. You can also, by the way, just hit the enter key on the keyboard and I'll do the same thing. Now you can see that Topaz ReMask 3 did a great job of immediately giving us a beautiful mask. As we zoom in on it, first of all, I'm zooming in and out either by using the standard plus or minus keys that you'll find in Photoshop, or you can use in the upper left-hand corner the plus or minus keys here in the view. I can see here that there's a little bit of a contamination that's left. So now, instead of looking at the image as only one view, we can switch over here to a dual view, and one image on the left-hand side can be dedicated to the original image, while the image on the right can be displaying the mask. This is a wonderful new addition to ReMask 3 that allows the user to see different parts of an image at the same time as they're working. If you notice a little bit of a contamination right over here, the wonderful technology of Magic Brush is going to help us out a lot. Choose the background brush, which again, remember, is the red brush here on the left. All you're going to do now is just click, and you can see that now ReMask 3 is recalculating just this region to clean up that area. As we progress further down, we can see a few other areas that can use a little cleanup, so we'll go through here doing the same thing. And finally, after we're done with this whole thing, if we just zoom out to view it fitting on the screen, the mask looks very, very good. We can also view the keep channel, which means we can see the dog as if it's being cut away from the background. As we zoom in slightly, we can see that the right-hand side looks really, really good against that default gray background. Now, if you don't want to composite against gray and you would like to choose a different color, under Menu, you'll find a Set Background Color. Here, a standard color requester is presented, so now we can change the background color to whatever we want. So let's go for kind of like this pastel-ish purple color. Hit OK, and now you'll notice that that color has now changed. Now, as we look along the top of the dog, we can see that there is a little bit of a color contamination. And what's happening is that on the original image, there was a very dark black background over here, and that's why that's still a part of our image. There's another new feature that's been added into ReMask 3, which is called Foreground Color Recovery. And the only thing I'm going to do right now is just essentially slide that over, and you can see ReMask 3 is doing some calculations to try to correct for that. Actually, let me pretty much slide it all the way over, and you can see that actually it's done a very, very good job cleaning up some of those areas. If you see that there might be still a little more contamination, always feel free to just grab the blue brush and just kind of go over those areas again, and you can see that it's going to do a great job of just cleaning that up too. And now we're going to examine all the way around the dog to make sure that everything's okay. And then finally, as I zoom in the lower right-hand corner, we could see that in the original image, there was a color difference between the dog and that orange background. It was very, very subtle, and there's practically no line that separates the dog away from the background, and that's why there's a little bit of a discrepancy over there. Once again, because Magic Brush is on, by simply selecting the red or the background brush, just touch the area that you don't want, and ReMask 3 is going to clean that up. And that same thing applies for selecting the green or the foreground brush, and by touching that, it's going to solidify that area as well. So this is a wonderful way of forcing Topaz to once again keep the things you want and throw away the things you don't want in this very interactive, organic manner. And once you're satisfied with your final composite, hit the OK button. Ta-da! Here's the final mask. Now you'll notice that we have actually 3 channels here along the right-hand side, or I should say 3 layers. The foreground copy, which actually includes the mask. There it is. We have the original, which is the dog with its original background. And finally, the background layer that we already had. So here is now our final composite. And as we zoom in, we could see that Topaz has done an incredible job of every little detail on the dog has been captured perfectly. And there is no color contamination problems along the edges as well. So now that we've seen a very basic outline of Topaz ReMask 3, let's talk about some more advanced applications. We're going to try an application that most people consider probably the most difficult masking process, and that is masking out a tree out of its background. So here is our tree. I'll zoom in on that a little bit so you can see better what it looks like. Now this normally would be a nightmare for any other masking tool, but in ReMask 3 there's some revolutionary technologies that are going to really help you out. First, just to facilitate us focusing on the tree, I'll just crop in this area here. So that's the only area that we're going to work with. And please notice there's only one layer here right now. There's actually no background layer. So we're only concerned about masking the tree away from its background. So now that we got the tree, time to filter Topaz Labs, Topaz ReMask 3. Once again, as before, make a thick brush, and default color is going to be blue. One of the highest priorities of the design of ReMask was to allow the user to make really rough brush strokes to create very intricate and perfect masks. So, very rough outline here. Choose the blue bucket fill to fill in the interior of the tree area that we want. And then the red, which once again dictates the things that we don't want, we can bucket fill or flood fill the background with the things that are unnecessary. Now, in the previous version of ReMask, we would have to go in here and very delicately and slowly touch these areas that we wanted to have ReMask consider as the foreground or the solid areas. Well, in ReMask 3, there is a new technology called single color selection. And once again, this has really revolutionized the way that you're going to be doing some of your selections. Simply select green, which identifies the foreground. Touch any color that you're interested in, as far as the color that's on the tree, and just brush rough across the entire tree. Okay? Now, if we zoom in on this, you're going to see that as we click and brush, the color that we're clicking on is being used as a simple selection. And also, the color range identifies what the tolerances are of colors that are similar to that. I can click on this off-white color over here and just brush, again, click, brush, click, brush. And this way, you have a really, really quick way of selecting the things that you know are going to be the foreground. Okay, so I'll do a few more of that just very, very quickly. I'll zoom away with the minus key on the keyboard. And once you're satisfied with doing these little foreground colors, the same thing applies for background. So under single color selection, choose background, same thing. Let's also make our tolerances just a little bit higher. Make sure you don't go over a tolerance of 20 because that's just going to select too much of the colors and it's not going to give you good results. So again, just doing a simple click and a drag is all that you need to be able to quickly throw away the things from the background that we don't want in this mask. Okay, so to click and draw, click and draw, click and draw. Really, really, really quick. And same thing applies for some of the interior details. I can see some clouds here in the background. I click on those. Some of the areas between the leaves or the branches of the tree that we want to get rid of. Click and draw. And once you're satisfied with this process, and in this case, I'm getting really, really close to being done. Okay, this is pretty good. Let's now ask Topaz to do the computation and see what kind of a mask it's going to come up with. You can see here down at the bottom that the computer is hard at work trying to figure out the mask. Ta-da! Now that's pretty amazing for the first pass. We can see as we zoom in on it that every little leaf and every branch has been perfectly captured in the mask. As we go back to the bottom, surprisingly, the tree trunk, which would have been considered the easier part, has got a few problems, mainly because if we look at our tri-map here, by choosing tri-map, we could see that because I used a very rough brush around that area, Topaz is considering some areas around there. But because Magic Brush is by default turning on, choose your background brush and just click. And immediately, by clicking on the areas that are unnecessary, ReMask is now forced to recalculate just that local region and clean up all the things that are unnecessary. Okay, let's do a few more of that right there. Now finally, as we look at the some of the smaller details, like as we look right over here, let's take a look at the original image over here. I can see that this area needs to be pretty solid. So again, just by using the single color selection, click, draw, and immediately it recalculates and it gives me a nice solid leaf right there. And as I go around the tree, I'll make sure that I grab some of these small inconsistencies that Topaz might not have picked up. So let's keep going around, see if there's... Oh, here's a couple of small leaves over here that we want to pick up. So let's draw a little bit of that in there. It's going to recalculate that. Beautiful. And I can see that some of the background is coming through over here right now. So choose the red single color selection. Just click in that area and draw. And again, you'll be able to see how it's going to recalculate the brush over there and just clean all that up. Recalculate the mask and clean it all up. Okay, I see a couple of areas over here. Now you notice that you can either click on this side or you can actually click on this side. Click on it and draw slightly, and now we'll be able to see after it recalculates that it's going to recapture. Oops, that time around, we actually were using the red or the background brush. So it's a good thing we got undo. Just undo it. Make sure you got the foreground brush selected. Select and draw. And so now we'll be able to see that that's going to come back as well. Okay, beautiful. Let's zoom out of it. And if we're satisfied with this mask and it looks actually really, really good, just hit the OK button. Ta-da! So here is our final masked tree. In fact, I'll move that out of the way just so you can see it, or I can even turn off the background so you can see that we have now perfectly masked the tree out of its background. A very complex mask that we finished in a matter of a few minutes using ReMask 3. Now finally, the last example is going to highlight another one of the new technologies of ReMask, which is great for masking things like hair or veils from a bride. Let's open this example right over here. Okay, perfect. Now, this has already been done before. Let me kind of highlight what happened. The original image, here's what the original background image looks like. And as you can see, her original background is not very exciting. Actually, it looks kind of dead back there with dried out leaves or the dried out grass. So to be able to put her in front of something a little bit more exciting, like the valley back there, that's a really, really nice dramatic background that we can composite her on top of. Now you're noticing as we zoom in on this that she does have a veil that needs to become transparent to that background. So now let's show you exactly how this is done. We'll turn off those two other layers, select the background layer, under Filter, pull down to Topaz Labs' Topaz ReMask. Okay, so here we are in Topaz ReMask 3 again, and as before, just choose a nice thick blue brush, which is the default, but this time we're going to make sure that we cover every area of her veil that we know is going to be semi-transparent with that blue. Okay, as we zoom in, using the keyboard shortcuts of the plus or minus, I'll make my brush a little bit smaller. Now, by the way, you can make your brushes smaller or bigger here under brush size just by simply moving the slider over to the right or to the left to make the brush smaller. Or you can use the bracket keys. The right bracket is going to make things bigger, and the left bracket is going to make it smaller. So when you're going over some of the regions that have a harsher edge to it, like you can see that these areas don't need to be as thick, you can go ahead and make that be a little thinner. Now, as we come down along the sides, we can see that, again, there is an area where her veil is transparent. So just make sure that you cover those areas in blue so that Topaz can later on calculate how to create the transparency. Okay, so that looks pretty good right there. We want the background to be red. Once again, we choose the bucket fill for red and fill in the background. And now we're ready for Topaz to do the calculations. We click on compute. You can see that the computer is doing its work. And here's what it just came up with. Now, that actually looks pretty good, because if I do a split screen over here for you, the mask is nice. If we look at the original, we can see that Topaz is doing a great job right off the bat. But there is a little problem when we look at the keep. I want you to notice how now the background colors that were from the original grass background is actually coming through the veil. Well, we don't want that. We want the veil to be transparent, essentially to nothing, so we can replace the background with whatever we want. Now, for this particular example, I want the background to be kind of gray, so I'll go back to my set background color, and I'll choose a nice, center tone of gray and hit OK. So now we get a nice gray back there. Now, the reason why I did that was so that you can actually see the green that's coming through. Let me make the gray be a little bit darker, just so that I can see more of that yellowish greenish color coming through. Okay, perfect. So now let's talk about the new technology of dual color selection. Here's the way it works. First, select dual color selection. Click on something that you know is solid on the veil. Like in this case, the actual outline of the veil we know is very solid. Just make sure you are selecting that solid color. Then select the color in the background that you think is a nice average representation of the colors that are going through this area. So let's click on that. And then with our thick brush, we're just going to brush over this area right here. Now, as you're brushing, you'll notice that on the right-hand side, Topaz is making these very light selections, and it's going to recompute. You can see that now some of the background green that was over there is being subtracted from the mask. Now, we are getting a little contamination along the right-hand side, but that's easy to fix because we do have Magic Brush turned on by default. So because of Magic Brush, I can just go in through here and brush that in, and that's going to help me clean up some of that extra contamination. Now, the new mode for the dual color selection also leaves a new effect on the tri-map. So if we take a look at the tri-map, you can see that this new area right now is highlighted with a yellow. So it's showing us that it's not the blue that we're used to working with for the compute area, or the green that we're used to working with that identifies the foreground, or the red that's the background. The yellow is a new selection tool that's going to help us with these veil areas or really subtle details like hair or smoke, or even transparent glass. So once again, let's go back to our keep so we can see what's going on and continue to work. So we can see this area here is coming through, and again, as before, choose dual color selection. Choose the color of the veil, which represents a very solid part of the veil. And then I can see that this area right here is a good idea of what that little blotch is right there. So again, select it and just kind of like blotch in these areas here. Okay, let's see what happens. Perfect. It's beginning to actually really subdue these areas as much as we can. And I'll just continue to do this all the way through. As I see any kind of contamination over here, I first select this, select part of the background, and just kind of brush in that area here to see what kind of effect we're going to get. Wonderful. It's all beginning to come together. And anytime you see any of this extra contamination along the edges, click on the red brush and just click, and that's going to help you clean that up instantly. Let me come down to the bottom. Okay, I can see that this area here needs some help. So again, dual color selection. First, just click on a solid part of it, click on the background, And let's just kind of brush in this area right here. Okay, let's see what it's going to do. Beautiful. Again, you can see how beautifully it has brought back that extra line of the brush. And we want to get rid of some of the colors in here. So, as before, selecting the solid part, selecting what we think is the average color of the grass in the background, and just kind of brush in this region right there. Let's see what we get. Okay, it's beginning to work. This, and a little bit of this, and just brushing in that area. Okay. So, as we look at the mask channel, we can see some of the areas that need to be solidified just by choosing the green. Let's solidify that area just by drawing that in. Okay, nice and solid. And at any time you can choose back to the keep and just kind of check the work as it's going along. Oh, that's a mistake, so let's undo that. Okay, let's switch back and forth between the mask, which looks great, and the keep. Going around the edges. On the hair up on the top over here, as we look at the mask, there's a little bit of a contamination that's there. So let's just click with the background selection tool, and we can eat in on the mask there. And this should be a little bit more solidified. So I'm using the keyboard shortcuts of the Q, W, and E to select either the foreground, red, or the compute brush right there. So let's select on that. That's going to help us solidify that. Let's solidify this area too. And if it picked up a little too much of the background there, let's just click on that with the background. It's going to clean that up as well. Okay. Now over on the left-hand side, actually, things are looking really, really good. So let me just go on to the keep. I'm very satisfied with the way that things are looking along the left-hand side of the image. So as we pull back just slightly, the mask is beginning to come together really, really well. And then finally, if we are noticing some of that color contamination in there, once again, by using the foreground color recovery, let's crank that up. And now Topaz starts trying to compute how to modify the original RGB image to compensate for some of this color contamination that could be going on in the image. Okay, we'll bring that up basically all the way. And then by using a little bit of desaturation in that area, now this is really, really like magic. Desaturation is going to take some of that color cast that we had from the greens, and it's going to saturate that out, or I should say desaturate it, so that the green is going to go away and we're going to be left a little bit more with the original veiled color. So I'm actually pretty satisfied with this. Let's do just a little bit more cleanup around these edges. Just got a couple of strangling pixels hanging around. Let's clean that up just to make it absolutely perfect. There we go. Okay, so I'm happy with it. Let's go ahead and hit OK. Ta-da! So here is our masked image. Let's first of all take a look at it as it gets composited against the background, and that is just absolutely amazing. I'm going to zoom in on here just so you can see that we have the transparency from the veil that's being maintained. In fact, I'll move that around. That's the background layer right there, and let's choose our bride and move her around so you can see that all these transparencies are being maintained even along the left-hand side over here while Death Valley is coming through fine. All right, let me again zoom that out so you can just appreciate that composite. So essentially, we went from something that was a really boring background to something that's a very dramatic pose in front of Death Valley. So that is the basics of Topaz ReMask 3, and join us for some other explanations of Topaz in the future tutorials. Thank you very much, and once again, this has been Greg Rostami from Topaz Labs.